Hi everyone, I'm Jocelyn, and I am grateful you're here. You're listening to the Starting with Gratitude podcast. This is a safe space intended to host meaningful conversations exploring all topics of the human experience. Every conversation starts with gratitude and remains rooted in gratitude. After you listen, make sure to join the community by subscribing and sharing. I am so happy you have joined us. Hi, Rocio.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing really good. As mentioned before, we really got started with this conversation. I'm just really excited for what we're going to get into. I just feel like the work that you do with water is really beautiful, and I'm sure that you have your own beautiful stories and experiences of how you even came into doing what you do. So I'm excited to touch on that, and I'm so grateful that you're here and you're going to be sharing with us todo lo que haces. So yeah, I'm doing really good. How's your spirit right now?
I'm good. It's interesting. Mother's Day is around. We're basking under the energy of Mother's Day. It's Latinos celebrate Mother's Day today. I think the time that we're in brings up a lot around the mother wound and how we were nurtured and how we nurture. And I've been in a lot of reflection, but to be quite honest with you, I've been in a lot of space of gratitude. And that hasn't always been the case. And I know that we're in such uncomfortable times, but I'm so excited, and I'm really reveling in this time and how I've, just where I'm at right now, and the
Mm-hmm.
work that has been done to kind of hone in
Mm-hmm.
on transcending and holding myself in a way that I never did before. So
Mm.
as the mother wounds come up, it's almost like a new iteration of like, I can hold myself in a different way. There's a part of
Mm.
me that's not looking outside of me as much.
Mm-hmm.
There may be glimpses of that, but I can hold myself. I can
Mm.
mother myself in such a profound way. And yeah, I'm excited for that. And
Mm.
I'm honored to feel that, even though that hasn't always been the case. And I'm sure it won't be here, for
Yeah.
very much longer, because that's just part of who we are and how we move.
Mm-hmm.
It's in iterations and processes and ups and downs.
Yeah.
But in the moment, I feel nurtured.
Hmm.
I feel really nurtured.
I love that. And I think that having the awareness that, it is, I've just been thinking a lot about how our bodies really do pick up on anniversaries and dates and holidays and just all the significant experiences that we've had growing up. Like our body really does memorize these things, and for Mother's Day, for example, anyone who was significantly impacted by that, some emotions may arise and you may not understand why, but it's like your body really does memorize these days. So I'm glad that you are feeling nurtured in this season of this Mother's Day energy. Before we dive in deeper, I'm going to ask you to share with us what it is that you express for your gratitude.
I mentioned a little bit just right now. I'm really grateful to honestly be living in this time. Um, there's a lot of shifts in our collective experience, and we're getting to live it in this moment. And it's one of the biggest shifts that humans have experienced collectively almost at the same time
Mm-hmm.
for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And I'm extremely grateful for that, even though it's not an easy journey.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to work with the elements in the way that I have and I continue to do is one of the biggest gifts of my life. And I'm extremely grateful to share it in any way that I can.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
even being here and sharing the little bit that I can is a big gift for me.
Yeah. It's a gift for us too. To kind of, briefly inform those that are listening or watching, you really emphasize the element of water a lot. How did that come about for you when you were stepping into your gifts? Why did why water? Of all the elements or all the different ways that we can access our spiritual gifts, like why did water call to you?
Yeah, so I'm at a stage right now where I'm piecing information back to early childhood. I can tell you viscerally when this path marked itself in this new iteration. And I'll go into that. But as I'm recollecting and piecing parts of the puzzle, water has been the informer for such a long time. And I still remember, well, for one, my name means water. In Spanish, Rocio means the dew or the mist of the morning. My birthday, I'm born on the equinox, so I'm a Pisces Aries cusp. So talk about water being an imprint in my life path. Um, I grew up around the Arroyo Seco here in LA. I grew up going to the Arroyo Seco, growing up with my father, and I just remember as a child living in a very chaotic environment that water was always that refuge for me.
Mm.
And there's moments in my life growing up that marked that experience. But moving forward, as a younger adult, I would say that about 10 years ago, I had this I would say an epiphany, and it was also the marking of a really transformative spiritual journey. And it was a dream that I woke up from and told me that I needed to leave all of my life here in LA. I was working in education at the time, doing a lot of organizing and activist work, and um, I was burning out. I was having a really hard time in my life. Um, and I listened to this dream, and this dream took me on this journey. And without knowing, I had bought a one-way ticket down to the motherland, to Mexico. And without knowing, I was following the Mayan route all the way down to when I made it down to Guatemala. And that's where I feel that my work got that really set the foundation for me to understand how this life would unfold on some level. Because once I ended up at that school, it was a meditation center that studies metaphysics. And I was in a long bout and in a process of a lot of inner exploration for 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
And it was during that time that I had a lot of revelation around my work with water. And that
Mm.
was before I even came across it in the way that I did. So at that time, I remember seeing visions and dreams that I would be holding people in the water. And I said, well, I'm going to go into midwifery and birth work. It seems natural. I'm already keen to that community. And 9 months coming out of that process, literally 9 months, I came across my first water training.
Mm.
And that's when I realized that I was having all these premonitions about how my path would get revealed. And ever since then, it's been a deepening with that practice. And I realized that was me being led to the water in the way that I was doing it, or that I was led at that time, was the opportunity for me to bring that medicine to the table, to my communities and to those that I was around. And I never stopped, and I haven't stopped since then.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a whole 10-year journey specifically with this work of water. And the way that I work with water is multifaceted. But I did start with the somatic practice of, taking someone in body temperature water, where the body is, is relaxed. And you're holding the body as it's floating, and there's gentle manipulations of the body. And so what that does to somebody is literally like taking a human back into in utero experience. So a lot of what happens when someone is in that state, and they're in that state of surrender, and they're not feeling compression, probably for the first time, if unless they're avid swimmers or they love water and they can float in that way. And with the added connection and touch of someone holding them there. I'm not sure when, probably since we were children, did we have that experience. And so that really awakens and opens up the somatic memory of our nervous system to remember, what it really feels like to be held, and to not feel bogged down by the compression of life that we feel every single day.
Yeah.
So that experience opens up so much for people. I mean, I've seen so many iterations of what that memory in the body awakens. People remember what it was like when they were young children, when they were possibly in utero. People have had experiences with past lives. Artists come up with beautiful renditions of their creativity, because now they have that space, that energetic and that creative space in their brain to be able to say, okay, this is my creation. I mean, I've had so many experiences with this work, and that's why I wholeheartedly believe in it. And the fact that we come from that, it's such a powerful element, because we come from that. We gestate in that, in our mothers. We're majority that. And we look at the world, it's the same. It's the macro to the micro. It's that same reflection.
Yeah. How would you say that water has impacted you in like your personal healing?
It's given me so much. When I came across the water, I had, I mentioned that I had been in a bout of a deep experience. I had come out of a bout of silence for 50 days. I was really trying to make sense of my life at that time, because I had understood and gone into spaces of deep potential. And when I came across the water path was the first time, I wouldn't say the first time, but it helped me really integrate a lot of that experience. And that's where the work of the inner child started before, and it was already in the process, but that really kind of housed that container for me to say, okay, this is what happened, and this is how I keep moving through and coming back truly to the emotional body. Because as a child, and this is the process of trauma, there's a lot of a disassociation that happens when environments feel so overwhelming. And I realized that along my path, I was seeking certainty in some way. And so I was trying to grab onto certainty. And sometimes the spiritual path becomes the thing that becomes certain. We don't talk about this a lot, but sometimes it does, right? And I realized that there was this need and this grasp that I had gone towards since I was a child, because that was the only certainty that I had in the invisible to make sense of the chaos that I was living through. So what water helped me do was to come back to my body, to come back to my feeling body, and to allow myself to still explore these other possibilities, but to bring them back into the body.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, not I think, my process with water has been that, learning how to feel and be comfortable in feeling, learning how to sense and be comfortable in sensing. And that integration into my body, which is not done, it'll be a lifelong process, has also, at the same time as I have come back into my body, allowed me to have my body as a vehicle and a vessel, so that these gifts can also be unraveled in ways that feel safe or safer.
Right.
So it's almost like there was possibility and opportunity, and I got to see that, but I had to come back into my body and to contain that and to understand and keep developing my emotional intelligence and my somatic intelligence, so that the gifts can fully be harnessed. And I'm still in that exploration. I mean, just this last December, I went through another unveiling of my energetic gifts as well.
Yeah. I always love talking to people who are deep in spiritual work or committed in spiritual work, like how their own gifts have impacted them and their healing. Because, like you said, in order for our gifts to really flourish and reach their fullest potential, like we have to prioritize our wellness and our healing. And, you know, I also had an experience towards the end of 2020 where I noticed that I was going through like another spiritual awakening. Because I feel like I personally kind of go through an awakening annually, but last year is like really emphasized on me leaning more deeper into my gifts. And I just had this like really strong sense that I had to do deep shadow work, because for many reasons, one being, you know, to make sure that I'm really honoring my gifts by healing myself first. But if I'm really going to commit gifting my gifts to others, I have to make sure that I'm well first, you know, that I'm like really in tune in that way. What did your awakening that you mentioned that you had in December, what did that look like for you?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for asking. And just to add to what you were saying, this is part of the evolutionary process. We're always going to be going through shifts, and it's important for you to know. And sometimes you don't necessarily are not fully in tune when those cycles come. Every December, by the winter, I go into hibernation. I usually do like a long bout of silence, and I reconvene, I regroup. And I knew going into this December, something was already telling me intuitively that it was going to be a little more profound than I have usually experienced. And not to say that I haven't experienced profound experiences, because I have. This is how, in some ways, my soul thrives, is in some ways, not always, in the uncertain aspects of development in the spiritual realm, in the energetic realm. In the physical realm is a different story, but I knew it was gonna be a big shift, and I knew I was diving into an abyss on some regard. And what ended up happening was I took a pause, and I thought it was going to be a month long. And I just remember taking about 3 weeks to untether energetically from the people that I had been doing healing work with. And so sometimes that happens, right? When you're holding a lot of space for people, as much as you clear, there's still some energetic connection that happens there. And so I just needed to untether and to clear that energetic space so that I can go into myself more deeply. And this is the first time that it literally took me a month to untether. And by that point, that's where my deeper shadow work started happening. And it's been literally 6 months. I still don't feel like I'm out of it completely. I'm coming out of it, but I'm not out of it completely. And what ended up happening was my intuitive and my psychic powers started kicking up a couple notches. And that started happening. I do a lot of dream work. Dreams have been a big revealer in my life. It's been incredibly potent. But the dream kind of aspect started accelerating, and my psychic ability started just tapping into other realms that I wasn't used to. So holding that space for those abilities takes a lot, and so the sensitivity kicked in tenfold. And so I just had to carve as much space and time to be able to kind of make sense and let it settle into my energetic system. And like I said, I'm still not coming out of that. But in the midst of all that, I started, again, with the shadow work, started to realize a lot of the needs that I had for a long time and why I was doing what I was doing, that was dying off. So that was dying off, and that need was changing at the same time that my psychic abilities were reaching out for for new information. So there was grief happening. In many ways, I didn't understand it immediately. There was a sense of loss and grief that was happening. And then there was this potential opportunity and information that I was also accessing. But it was just like taking time to kind of connect to each other. And the biggest, I would say, kind of revelation around this time was I had done a lot of inner child work, and it felt like there was a completion that happened during the cycle. And not to say that that's also going to end, it's going to continue. But then my adolescent kind of shadow work started to kick in really profoundly. And so one of the things that I came to realize was, I grew up with a working class, obviously, family. My father, both of them are migrants from Michoacan, from Mexico. Growing up in LA in the 90s, in the height of the gang culture and a lot of uncertainty. I mean, we got to witness a lot. And what I realized was that my childhood was incredibly painful in so many ways, but my father never laid hands on me or my sisters when we were growing up as young children or young girls. But when he started losing control of us and we started growing up and becoming young women and into adulthood is where he, got a little heavy-handed with us. And I realized that a lot of the subconscious pattern that I had been kind of working through for a long time was that the stage of development from the time of 10 to 24 was a time when my dad, me and my dad had a lot of conflict, physically and verbally and emotionally in that regard. Was that it was a time where I was learning to assert myself and assert my independence and assert my voice and assert myself in this world. And the opportunities that I had to do that, or when I tried, I would always have a backlash or resistance from obviously the father figure. So what ended up happening in my life, and that pattern became extremely clear during this time, was that there's always this energy that happens with me where I had the energy to create or to put forth or to start expressing. But then on the subconscious level, there was always like this back end or this backlash that would happen, whether it was visceral or it was just a projection of myself. Obviously, a lot of it is the projection of myself. That's why it would happen. But I always felt that the moments that I had the opportunity to express and to assert myself in a certain way, something would always come towards me that would just silence that part.
Mm-hmm.
And that revelation for me has been so huge, and I'm still making sense of it and I'm still integrating it. But it's almost like that stage, right? It's like I finished the childhood stage. Now I'm in the adolescent stage. The crone archetype is kicking in such a way that is helping me really make sense of it all and to kind of carve the path in a protected way that I never had before because of my experience. And so that's a, a little bit of what I've gone through this last winter and that transformation. And I'm actually glad that you talk about it because that for a while I was seeing, and I think culturally we're at a place where it's becoming more accepted to look at the shadow work and spirituality.
Yeah.
Where for a while it was starting to be this very positive light culture around moving through our life, but that's never the case. It was a fallacy in some ways. It was a false light in some ways. We have to go into the shadow, into the underworld, to explore and dig and see what's there in order for us to make more sense of ourselves and what's around us. And we will never make full sense of it, but at least some of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the simple fact that duality is just divinity, like light appreciates darkness as much as darkness appreciates light. And as much as I do consider myself to be a light worker, for some reason I've started to feel like I'm more so a shadow worker, because reflecting back on all the experiences that I've had in my life and how I've approached them and held space for them and alchemized them, and also held space for others who were in a dark period, like I've never really shied away from the darkness. And that's something that I'm still integrating. And thank you for sharing everything that you shared. And as you were talking, I was just like thinking to myself, like, wow, like it really, life really is a process, and I truly value people who take time to do all of this work and turn inward and realize that it takes time. Healing is like not something that you just like arrive to. It's something that's consistently just a part of your journey, and it's going to show up in different ways. And, it's just, thank you for sharing everything that you shared, because again, like, as you mentioned, even earlier in our conversation, I have noticed how the world and so many people are experiencing similar experiences. Like those who have already kind of stepped into their gifts in some way have noticed that their psychic abilities are being heightened, or, they're awakening that like different parts of themselves, or people who are newly stepping into the healing world are just now like becoming familiar with like things that they need to heal. And, so it really is a special time to be experiencing, because we really are awakening in so many different ways. And yeah.
And again, that process to me goes back to the water. It's like, when we look at the ocean, everything comes in waves, right? Everything is literally a wave. And that's why I feel like, that gravitation towards the elements per se, and this opportunity to go in deeper into healing work, but particularly with the water, that It's the mastering of our connection to our emotional self and our sensory self, especially in cultures where that's been negated for a long time. I always say that there's this like spiral, this pyramid. It's like, the pyramid goes, up, and there's the pyramid that goes downward, and we're that polarity. But for a long time in our culture, it's everything that is oriented upwards, right, towards the mind, towards intelligence. I mean, just even our fascination with like exploration of the outer universe is what's constantly getting rewarded. And for me, the feminine energy is the downward spiral. It's the one that connects you to the earth. It's the one that says, we're also a part of this. And in order for you to feel that you're a part of this, you have to feel. You have to understand that feeling is not negative like the culture has made it out to be. And that's the reason why we're seeing all these transitions in our collective story right now. Why more people are awakening to consciousness, which is that memory inside of us. It's water. And to that sensory exploration, to say, what's happening inside? How do I ground into my body? Because people are starting to understand that the only freedom that we have is not necessarily just about how we're relating to the outside culture, but what are we alchemizing inside? And we have to go inward and downward to be able to do that. Because we have all these abilities that we still have maybe tapped into, as we're at the surface of that.
Yeah.
And personally, I'm excited for this opportunity. That's why I say, like, the time that we're in is an opportunity. It's not an easy one, but the veils are getting lifted.
Yeah.
And the opportunity is that we come back into that freedom. That freedom has to be protected and invoked within first.
Yeah. When I think of water, I think of emotions, I think of vulnerability. It's like a strength that comes from softness in a way. And with that said, like you being so in tune with water, you being so in tune with emotion, like one thing that we really wanted to touch on is navigating this world as an empath, navigating this world as someone who feels deeply, someone who's very aware of emotions. Where do we even begin with that? I for sure, one of the biggest things for me last year was prioritizing learning how to really implement energetic boundaries, because I am a very, very empathic person, both intuitively and also just from the experiences that I've had in life and being able to understand others. How has that empathic experience and journey been for you?
It's been hard. It's been really challenging. Sometimes the gift is in some ways the curse, right?
Yeah.
I've always been extremely sensitive, and as a child, I think it would come out in like lashing out and maybe bouts of like anger without knowing how to express. And then it was like just blocking and silencing a lot of that. And so that reclamation over the last, I would say, 10 years has been a journey. There's been a lot of situations that I allowed in my life because I didn't know how to, right, create the containers, and you grow as you go. And I even think for a long time it was like, even if I felt the energy, there was still denial of that, right? And that's where, like, we cross our own boundaries, even though we feel it and we know it, you still choose otherwise. And then you go into these experiences where okay, life was telling you no. And then you keep going through those iterations time and time again. And it becomes the pattern and the theme until one day it gets exhausting and you say, okay, no, something has to really shift. And sometimes you can see it before it happens, which is great. It just depends. But for me, yeah, for a long time, I was putting myself in situations that I think it was that innocent mind. And I think as empathic, intuitive people, sometimes it's like you get pulled, you carry that sense of innocence, that you get pulled into situations because you're needed by other energies, right? That's the best way to explain it. And even though you're not necessarily fully in consent of that, or you're aware that that's what's happening. And I think for me, like, I just had to, again, as I'm opening up, and I was opening up more my energetic container and my emotional container, I went through these immense experiences where it was like, okay, when do you get the lesson? Are you getting the lesson? And then it was like slight shifts, and then I would see the difference when I would actually listen. And that started building that muscle for me to be like, oh, this is what it feels like to say no in this situation, or to already put that kind of energetic block around what it is that I really am walking towards. And then life would meet me by putting certain experiences based on the intuition, on not only the no, because a lot of times sometimes we get caught up in the no, saying I don't want to experience these things, but we forget to say yes to other things. And so I was for a while also caught up in the no without even exploring or knowing how to explore my yes. And so as I was shifting through and growing more into my energetic container, I started learning how to say yes to certain things as I was saying no to others. And I would say that 2020 made things a lot more challenging because I saw the veil and I felt the veil, like many of us, especially who are extremely sensitive, just lift. And so that exposes our energetic container even more. And so if you don't have the tools to be able to say, okay, this is what is needed for me, and it takes a lot of time to go inward. And for me personally, nature and silence and away from people is how I regroup. I live in the city, and I could, for many years this has happened, I could literally hear the Wi-Fi, the EMFs, the vibration of it moving at night. I could hear it. That's my level of sensitivity. And so I know that I don't get the most restful sleep here or the rest. And so I have to constantly go out to nature to regroup. That's just how I work. But knowing, again, it's sitting with what frazzles us, what makes us uncomfortable, spending time asking those questions. And for me, the best answer and the best suggestion that I will always, say is that, can you get to nature? There's always a piece of nature around us. And that's always the best place where we can learn to recenter. And learning as you go along how to, as you tap into your empathic and emotional capabilities, again, saying no is such an important gift. And we haven't been taught that because we're also in the yes culture. We live in the yes culture. We live in the customer service culture. And especially if we're looking at our, the cultures that we come from, especially in the Latino community, we grew up seeing a lot of women in our culture being subservient and saying yes to everything. And so to unprogram from all of that it takes a while.
Yeah. Something that you mentioned at the beginning of what you were saying is how when you were little, you know, being a naturally sensitive person, like it kind of manifested in ways of like lashing out or like being very secluded, suppressing like what it is that you're feeling. I could relate to all of that. I like, even when you were saying it, I kind of like got goosebumps because I immediately just like went back to like my younger self. And something that really helped me understand myself more was an astrologer who I'm so grateful for, who is also a Scorpio like myself. And through her work, I got to understand more about like why I am the way that I am, and why I responded to things so intensely and deeply. What was something for you that was like really helped you understand yourself, that you're like something that just like clicked for you?
Ooh, there's so many of them. Um, so yeah, there's so many of them, but I could say that when I was at this mystery school, this meditation center, there was a lot that was definitely getting revealed about my abilities and my gifts. That really provided the space for me to explore them safely. But
Mm-hmm.
even as I was going through them, I didn't know that they were abilities until the application, which was in real life after. Um, I I'm an intuitive, so I can sense things as as they're coming. I have prophetic experiences. Actually, right before COVID, I was in a bout of silence again for about a month, and I was getting glimpses, and it was through symbols that I was getting glimpses of what was to happen. But at that in that moment, I didn't understand it. And actually, this is the second time I talk about it publicly. Um, I was seeing this earth. So I was getting this image of this earth, and I was seeing squiggly like, things moving around the earth. At that time, I know that there was all these fires that were happening in Australia. So of course, our mind wants to make sense of things as they're coming, and so I was like, okay, this makes sense why that was coming up, because it didn't make sense why it did show up in the way that it did. And so I put it aside, and it wasn't until probably a month into COVID, and as soon as COVID hit, I knew that we were in for the long haul. Like, I had even told friends, I was like, we're not shutting down for 3 weeks, we're not shutting down for a month, this is it.
Mm-hmm.
And some of my friends were like, you're crazy, right? And I'm like, yeah, well, that's my life. um and I realized that, especially what I had experienced during that last bout of silence, was it was giving me some insight that we would be in this space. um, and that was one example of many, but a lot of what has happened in my life too is just intuitions. Like, I'll dream about someone, and symbolically I'll have insight, and then I'll double check with them, and of course something is happening in their life that the dream was kind of telling me what was happening, and it was revealing itself through there. um, Especially when I started working with the water again, the intuitive ability started to kick in. So there's been a lot of experiences that I also had where I was, I can intuit what is happening with the other person.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times I'll get visions of their childhood, sometimes even past lives, of what happens to them. And then, if they are open and the space is open, then I'll have conversations about what the vision is. But a lot of times I don't, because some people are not ready to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll confirm it in that way. but most of the time it's feeling. It's feeling. Like I'll get impressions through feeling. So I'll just get a sense of somebody and what they're going through. And it's a level of intuition that is almost never wrong.
Yeah.
So I realized that through these experiences, it was just helping me understand that, okay, like you have, this is you. This is a part of you. You fit in this world somehow, right? Like
Yeah.
those things are not, and I'm glad again that we're in this space where people are starting to understand the importance of like spiritual development. We're not, even though I think a lot of us reincarnated and have had some of the bruising, I would say, of like karmic past lives where we tried to bring that awareness and the time wasn't right. And so we were lynched or killed or burned or, all those things. So I'm grateful that we're here, even though I feel like we're also going through a modern day witches hunt in many ways also. But there's no other opportunity for me. I'm trying to figure out the best way to say this, but it's almost like this opportunity that we're in is kind of putting pressure on us to be what we're really meant to be and to express that wholeheartedly. And there's less wiggle room to not be that. We're going to keep feeling the pressures and we're going to have to keep choosing, because if we choose something that's out of alignment, this is the reason why like time feels like it is moving faster, because in some ways it is. We're getting pressured to polish ourselves so that we can be in our full authenticity and show up in the way that we're supposed to be channeled through in this life. Not everybody will get there, but I think as we're opening up and surrendering to that, we're going to feel the pressures to do that, to be in more of our embodied alignment.
Yeah. I sense the exact same thing. Like we're all really being nudged to return home to ourselves, and whenever I talk to people who are currently in their shadow work or going through a dark night of the soul, or just going through like a really difficult transitional time, it's like it's happening on purpose. Like it's happening so that you can confront the things that you've needed to confront for a while. And now is like a time that you're really being encouraged to hold space for those things, because on the other side, you're going to be leaning deeper into your purpose and your gifts, but like you have to heal, and I feel like so many of us are having those experiences right now. Something that I thought of as you were speaking in regards to like having psychic abilities and being intuitive and being empathic is like knowing things that you may not necessarily want to know, or like knowing things that may be difficult to know. How have you navigated that? Like, for example, there have been times where I intuitively felt something that was about to happen, and I didn't act on it the way that I feel like I should have. And the thing happened. And now looking back, it's just like, it's just those lessons of like, I should have listened to my intuition, but in the ones that I'm specifically thinking about, I think that I set them aside or didn't lean into them because they were kind of tough. How have you navigated your, ability to foresee things?
Again, it's challenging. It is so, so challenging. But talking about the pressure cooker, it's getting more challenging to. I mean, there's a balance in between. I still kind of struggle with that sometimes, because learning to discern between what you see and then your capability and your, I don't want to say potential, but it's just your capability, right? As you're seeing what you're seeing, and then what is your capability to respond to that thing that you're seeing is really, really important. And I think sometimes I've caught myself, and I've witnessed it even during the pandemic, where I would see things as they were moving and I would see things coming. And I know that I didn't perhaps execute, or I didn't know how to share or incite or, like, help others pierce open. But I realized that it was also capability. And even though I foresaw it, my energetic capability wasn't fully there. There are
Mm-hmm.
times, though, where the capability is there. It's just the fear kicks in,
Yeah.
and, right, the recoil. And that has happened to me. But it's also, I realize that as I'm sorting through insights and iterations that are coming to me, I just have to constantly be checking in with me to be like, okay, what is your energetic container? How can you hold yourself, protect yourself as move into this iteration? And if you feel called, then even if you're scared, but your capability is there, I think that's just important to understand. Then you got to lean towards that. If
Mm-hmm.
you're scared, but your energetic capability is not there, then I would say no, because then it would be completely disastrous for you.
Yeah.
So I think that's one way that I learned to mitigate, and I get to assess and see, okay, where have I held back? And at least I could name it if I did. And where do I have the potential and the ability to step in towards something?
Mm-hmm.
And in which way can I do it as I'm foreseeing it, and I'm able to. But it's not easy to see. It's not easy to foresee, and live this normal life, right? Thank goodness normal life isn't normal life anymore. And that's why I think it's also a blessing, because I realized that, like, going into COVID, my life didn't drastically change. So I was
Mm-hmm.
already used to being in an inward space and silence. And so I was like, all right, great. The whole world is like in a retreat now.
Yeah.
But it does get challenging to see that as I'm witnessing people's abilities and the veils open up, that people feel that don't have the tools, they feel disoriented. Um, that's why a lot of anxiety and depression and suicide is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And what is worrisome for me is the way that our culture has been ingrained to not hold people who are moving through these transitions, which is really a lot of us and is probably the whole world in some regard.
Yeah.
But that's just an aspect that hasn't been part of the culture. And
Yeah.
so a lot of folks are, pressed and pushed towards other pathways that aren't necessarily beneficial for them. And that's what worries me.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely see that as well. And I think one of the hardest things, I think, as empaths and as healers is like knowing when we need to step back and allow others to experience their spiritual awakening independently on their own. And yeah, I feel like it's this, again, it's this like constant search for balance, you know? I think that perhaps all healers have gone through that journey of like realizing that you can't heal everyone, you know? And not only does that not serve them, but it doesn't serve you, because then you become more depleted, or you become disappointed, or you feel powerless in some way. And as you mentioned right now, like there are people who are, yeah, just aren't, I guess, used to all the veils that are being lifted. And yeah, just, yeah.
I want to name this sense of urgency. I know it's coming up a lot, and I have been challenged with that as well. There is an urgency in some ways of what is being asked of us as a collective culture and as humans to develop and unveil ourselves and step into our power and our life and our freedom. There's an urgency. The problem is that at the same time, we're dealing with polarity, and I'm not sure if this is going to make sense to people, that there's also not a sense of urgency. And so I think just going back to what you said is that there's an urgency because there are a lot more people that are understanding that this is a path that is unveiling. At the same time, I think as healers, like you said, and even as people are going through their awakening process, to understand that like it's a process. It's a process. And yeah, we're not always going to be there as healers to heal everyone, and we're not there for everybody.
Yeah.
And in the beginning of our interview, I talked about what happened in December. I think for me, it was the closing of a 10-year cycle. And the needs that I had developed during those 10 years to do and to fulfill my practice in the way that I did, those needs were not met anymore. So my need to be available to people in their healing process literally died. That need was not there anymore. So as I was untethering through that process, I realized like there's plenty of people. Life is going to continue without me, whether I'm living here or not, or doing my healing practice or not. Things are still going to be in movement.
Yeah.
So if I take this pause, however long it takes, for me to hold myself and to be as whole as I can, and to rewire myself, because I'm going through a whole rewiring, and I can learn what my capacity is, and I can hold myself in a different way because a new need is emerging, then I have to honor that.
Yeah.
Even if it's me stepping away completely from my practice in the way that I did, even if all these challenges are part of that, like I had to surrender. And if I'm teaching, right, the practice of surrendering and trust, then I have to keep embodying that.
Yeah.
And I literally had to let go of many things. And that's why I went through a whole metamorphosis. But I think, again, that sense of urgency is so important to address, that it's there, but also not. And so how do we, as an individual or even as a collective, right? Like I keep hearing folks saying like, especially now that we're dealing with a lot of folks understanding the ancestral trauma and all that work, and folks are wanting to do it, I'm seeing people really exhausted. And I see a lot of folks saying, I want it to end with me. And if this lands with anybody, and I want to keep expressing this, that no, it doesn't. That you are responsible to do the best that you can, but not to be a martyr in the process, because then you're recreating that cycle.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have to step out of ourselves to be like, yeah, there's certain things that I will be able to do, but sometimes it's the future generations that have more energy, talking about capacity, that will have more energy to undo the things that you're wanting to. So can you just also allow yourself to let go and trust and surrender and be like, okay, I'm not going to do all of it. There's some of it, and there's some that I believe in, that I am whispering into those future generations to carry that torch in whichever way they need to. But it requires for us to step outside of ourselves, and it requires us to lean into ourselves and to be like, okay, really, what's mine?
Yeah. Yeah.
Without flagellating ourselves along the process.
It really is so important to acknowledge that, like, our best work, healing work, spiritual work, professional work, whatever work it is, like, is not going to sprout from exhaustion or depletion. And I'm glad that you bring that up about, like, the awareness that literally what has been passed down and recycled for generations, like years and years and years and years, is also going to take years and years and years to disintegrate. And something that has helped me immensely as someone who would overwork themselves and would deplete themselves is like the simple fact that I acknowledge that I'm doing my best. And sometimes my best is going to look different tomorrow than it does today. But what more can you do beyond that without exhausting yourself? Because your ancestors don't want you to exhaust yourself. You know, source, the universe, whoever it is that you pray to, like, they don't want you to exhaust yourself. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because there's a lot of pressure in feeling the need to heal all the generational traumas and thought patterns that have been passed down, and it's a lifetime's process,
Lifetimes.
Mm-hmm.
Lifetimes. And not only are we dealing with our ancestral and our generational like patterns or repatterns, we're also dealing with our karmic evolution as a soul and what has happened. Right, there's a union between those two, because how we choose and what families we choose to come into is part of our karmic evolution. But it's also looking back at all those cycles before, in terms of what has happened in our soul's evolution over time, and like how did that try to compensate, or what was still missing, right? So that's another exploration in itself. But we also can't be carrying on that weight for those that came through our blood systems. And I think a lot of times we also put a lot of kind of emphasis on ancestral work without being discerning. Is that and the discernment is not all ancestors perhaps mean good or meant good. And some of them, based on unresolved things, could still latch on, right, through us and not let us, lift up in the way that we need to. And so we have to be really discerning when we call upon them, to know that, we don't have to call upon all of them, but that maybe we ask, those that are really ready to support us and our evolution, whichever way it needs to go, that they can be there with us, and maybe those that are not there to help, that we don't call upon them. We could still honor them, but they don't have to kind of put that weight on us.
Discernment is one of my words for the year. I feel like it's been coming up a lot, and it really is incredibly important. I feel I could speak on all of this for all day. But thank you for everything that you've been sharing with us. The work that you do is so important. And by that, like, I'm also speaking on like the self work that you do. I love thanking people for just their efforts, because that in itself is such an accomplishment, in my opinion. And so thank you for just your efforts in healing yourself and becoming more aware and sharing your gifts with others mindfully. To kind of bring this full circle, I have a couple last questions. You talked about how you touched on like something that you surrendered in this like past 10-year cycle that you went through. What do you feel like this next, if we were to look at the next 10-year cycle, what does that look like to you? Like, what do you feel like this cycle is going to be presenting you?
I mentioned in the beginning that I feel like as I was moving through kind of my adolescent healing journey, and understanding more of that and seeing that visceral pattern kind of show up, that the crone archetype is full on. And I feel like what she is helping me and is going to help me kind of move through is, again, create the boundaries necessary for me to be more radically open and be more radically me, in a space that feels safe. Not to say that the world is safe, the world will never be safe. I hope that, as I think part of why we wake up is that there's this kind of lingering voice behind us that says, we're here to find that space of safety and joy and pleasure and beauty. But at the same time, we understand the chaos of it. If it wasn't that, we wouldn't wake up.
Yeah.
So I feel like this next iteration is helping me hone in on a foundation that's going to allow me to, again, more radically express myself and to be that channel that I'm meant to be, because I know that I'm only tapping into a small percentage. And I'm excited to, again, have the crone be walking with me to say, let me be the one to carve that path for you to just go in. And joy and pleasure is going to be a huge part of that exploration, because I think a lot of times, and I've witnessed this, as playful as I am and things like that, I think there's this, like, I feel this energy coming in where there's going to be definitely a lot more like pleasure and joy, that's going to be part of the mix. How it's going to fully look like, I'm getting glimpses. I'm not sharing fully that yet, but I do feel like there's a clear message of what that would look like. It's just honing in on the embodiment of it right now. To make that happen is where I'm at, and that's why I'm so grateful that, again, this kind of awareness is coming to me in such a time. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, I'm excited for that for you too. The last question is, what do you feel like you are currently overcoming?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think the need to be needed, and I think this happens with a lot of healers. That's how we kind of have um, maybe have kind of supplemented or that void in some regard. And that's why this winter was so powerful for me, because I realized that that need was leaving me, and that need is no longer like a big subconscious like working pattern anymore. I don't need it anymore, and I think that's going to continue shifting the way that I show up, and again, protecting the bubble so that I can be more, really give a lot more, right? Because sometimes I realized that that need to be needed, that was like in the back of my head, that I wasn't fully aware of, that that was the mechanism that I was working through, even though it impulsed all this beautiful creativity, and I did what I did with wholeheartedly. There was still this pattern that just kind of pushed me to create and do because of that need. And now it's just not there as much. Like it's not a need that I need to fulfill. It's not poignant anymore, and that's
Yeah,
liberating.
yeah, definitely. And I love that you're allowing yourself to let go of that, to feel into that feeling of like, I think, I think that chapter, that aspect of my life is like coming to a close now. And I'm willing to surrender that, because I think, so often we'll hold on to those aspects that make up our identity because they're familiar or they've been such a deep part of who we are for so long that it's like, who will we be after this surrendering or letting go this aspect of myself? So I love hearing that willingness in you.
Totally.
Um, do you feel like there's anything that you wanted to express that you didn't get to?
I think for folks listening, I just want to emphasize the fact that I know a lot of people are going through a vast change in their life, and I would love for them to lean into spaces with tools that help them reconnect to themselves, um, and that you can find some solace in reclaiming that voice, and that you find either the networks, people, or the nature that can help you do that, because there's nothing really outside of us that's going to help us, that's going to empower us as much as us reclaiming that freedom within. So whatever it takes, I strongly urge that you seek out those spaces for you to find that voice within.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that message. I hope and I know that those who are meant to align with this conversation will, whether that's now or sometime in the future. But again, thank you for this, for your time and your energy into
Yeah,
coming into this conversation. I genuinely appreciate it, and um, I'm honored to share this with others.
thank you so much, Jocelyn. I appreciate it. Honestly, it's a gift for me too. Thank
Thank
you.
you.